I'd like to call this November 10th school board meeting to order. Renee, please note that all school board members are present and invite you to stand for the pledge. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First, we have approval of the agenda. Board, may I have a motion, please?
Madam President, I move that we approve the agenda as submitted.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Thank you, Dr. Clayton. Any questions or comments on the agenda? All those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. We have approval of minutes from previous meetings, the executive session, public hearings, and regular meeting minutes. Board, may I have a motion, please?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes from executive session, public hearing, and regular meeting.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Clayton. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Buckwalter. Any questions or comments about those minutes? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes from previous meetings, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, those minutes are approved. We have no public comments on agenda items. So we have the demographics research.
Yep, the first presentation is from Mr. Jerry McKibben, who I believe used to be the Indiana State demographer, right, for many years. And as you know, we're in the middle of 3 different studies, demographic study, facility study, and the policy analytics study. And tonight we'll hear from 2 of those, the results of 2 of those studies, the demographic study with Mr. McKibben and also the policy analytics study. So we're going to welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen of the board. May I remove my mask while speaking?
Yeah. Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I go up here. It's like trying to talk with a muzzle on. So, I'll go through the results of the demographic study. And there's 2 things I want to point out before I get into the actual meat of the presentation. Number 1, don't let that Rock Hill, South Carolina fool you. You'll notice my lack of a southern accent. I was born and raised north of Fort Wayne, Indiana, went to Carroll High School. My doctoral dissertation was on Indiana demographics. Used to be in the state of Utica for 30 years ago. We've done in Indiana over 100 school districts. We live or read Indiana demographics. And the second one, and the much more important point, is these are forecasts. They are not projections. Those are 2 different things. A projection is where you take a past trend, usually year-to-year survivorship, second to third, third to fourth, fourth to fifth, over usually a 5-year period, create an algorithm, and use that to literally project into the future what's going to happen. Very easy, cheap, until about the mid-1990s, that's all you had for school district forecasting. The only problem with the projection is they're almost always wrong, because the only way a projection like that can be accurate is that what's happened in the last 5 years replicates itself over the next 5 and 10. And I have no better proof than right now. I don't think this year, hopefully, will not be replicated anytime in the near future. These are forecasts. It's a 2-step procedure. The first thing we do is take your attendance area boundaries, superimpose that on 2010 census geography, pull all of your demographic variables into a complete demographic profile of each attendance area. Both fertility, mortality, and migration models specific to each district's attendance area's demographic composition, if you like, and calculate a full population forecast from 0 to 4 to 85 plus. The results of that population forecast then drives your enrollment forecast, so it's your local demographic trends that are driving the forecast, not in the past. We don't use national models, state models, regional models. is all built specifically for Greater Clark Schools' attendance area. And as we go through this, one of the points we should pay particular attention to is how demographically diverse the district is. You'll see a lot of variation between the attendance area, and the dynamics of those demographic trends will have a direct impact on what the teacher population minimum is going to be. But anytime you're doing a forecast, you have to have assumptions. These are broad socioeconomic demographic parameters that we use to build our models with. And if the assumptions aren't violated, we should be at the district level within plus or minus 2% of your total enrollment for the life of the forecast, 2021 all the way to 2030. So number one, this is the first one, the state, local, regional economy is not going into deep recession. Now, deep recession is 4 consecutive quarters where you've had more than 1% drop in GDP. Now, we had a huge one in the second quarter, bounced back in the third quarter. We're still down net about 8% right now, so we may pull out of it yet. We'll find out more in the next couple of months. So it was a very sharp recession, but not necessarily a deep one. It's going to have long-term ramifications. But it's definitely more to the downside than it's positive. Number two is actually more important. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate stays below 4.5%. This morning it was about 3%. Why is that so important? It drives your housing market. And the housing market is probably the variable with the greatest amount of influence on future demographic trends, particularly a district like Greater Clark. Now, and we'll get to more on this in the housing market a bit too, but one thing you need to remember is about 85% of the housing market is existing home sales. New home construction is only about 10-50% here, statewide, nationally, all over. Even during the peak of the housing boom 15 years ago, new home construction never exceeded 20% of the nation's home stock, home building. So that's very, very important. So everybody fixates on new home construction. I can just, drive up and down Fork Road here, so the building going on. Wow, it's all over the place. It's the existing home market that's your real driver. Mortgage rates stay the same. Housing foreclosure stays the same. That's going to be an issue here coming back again if we stay in a bit of a recession. Everything currently planned, approved, and permitted, built out by 29, occupied by 30. And that's our rule on this. If it's planned, platted, approved, and permitted, it's in the forecast. If the developer is thinking about it or speculating or somewhere in the process, we don't put it in, okay? We learned that years and years ago for the thousands of homes that were not built in Indiana and all over the country, in this area, in the last housing crunch. You could do a scenario forecast of what would happen if, someone we're doing one for Lebanon right now, someone was coming and build 1,000 housing units, but it's not through the process yet, they don't have infrastructure and things like that. You can do a scenario type of forecast. So as a rule of thumb, unless they're through the permitting process, we don't put it in. That way you tend not to hold the forecast. Number 7, probably the most important of all of them. The district has at least 1,000 existing single-family home sales annually between 2020 and 2030. That's the backbone of your housing market. You can build 800 new homes in this district a year. If you don't sell any existing homes, your population and your enrollment will drop. I cannot emphasize that point strong enough. And if people see new home construction going on, you tend not to think of existing home sales. Or that's where most of them come into, either into apartments, townhouses, single-family detached home, group home, whatever it might be. Very, very key. 8, unemployment rate. The average annual unemployment rate stayed below 8.5%. Okay, don't have a job, not to buy a house. We're using average annual now because we've had a huge spike earlier this year. It's going to come back down. So if we're looking at an average and annual, if it stays below that point, the economy is still relatively healthy, you're going to have people buying houses. Inter-district transfer rate remains possible. I mean, you have a lot of students that go to school outside of their assigned attendance area. We're holding that constant. over the next 10 years. I have no idea what your policy is going to be in 2 years. Rate of students transferring in and out of Greater Clark will remain the same. Big factor in Indiana. Indiana is one of the few states that has open enrollment. You go to any schools you want to. It's real chaos in this state. And you're more than one being greatly affected by it. We have the last 3 years' numbers too. As soon as the 2020s come out, probably January now. Usually it's December, but I'll look for January this year, given what's going on. We'll check and see how that's changed. Gasoline inflation rate stays the same, no building moratorium. Very important, number 13, the state of Indiana does not change its current laws for industry transfers, school vouchers, or charter schools. Now, they tinker with them every year a little bit. I'm talking about big fundamental changes, like they cap it, they get rid of one or whatever. So we're, relatively speaking, with some small modifications into it, that's going to stay constant. Because I don't know about you, but I have no idea what legislature is going to be doing in 2022. I don't think anybody else does either. So business remain viable. Existing home sales are not distressed. Housing turnover rate, and that's a very key one. That's the backbone of your housing market. You'll see a slight uptick at 62. You'll see another one at 65. But most people don't downsize their homes until they're in their 70s. It's not retirement that triggers it. It's either the death of one of the spouses or both of them lose the ability to drive. Then they can't maintain their home anymore, can't get any place. Only about 12% of people will snowbird at age 70 down to the south. About 8% go to assisted living centers. The vast, and if they do move, most of them want to move within 50 miles. Most downsizing migration is very, very short distance. Okay, that's very, very key. People always ask me, well, you're doing enrollment forecast. Why in the world are you looking at death rates for people over the age of 70? Well, if I know the number of homeowners in the area and their age structure, I've got a good proxy measure of how many homes will go on the market in the next 10 years. Okay, so very, very important that age distribution is where your population is distributed across the life course, not just in the district, but each of the attendance areas. Private homeschool attendance rates remain constant. We've seen some go to private, a lot come back with the recession. Homeschool is the wild card here. We've seen it double across the country, not just in Indiana. But it went from 2% to 4%. We'll see how that works out in the future. We're going to hold about 3.5% rate going forward. And foreclosure commercial property doesn't happen. So these are the broad parameters. Now I'll admit there's a lot of variation out there, particularly in these COVID times. Okay? Tough time to do forecasting. And I'll be the first to say, my doctorate's in demography, not epidemiology. So I know the limitations here. But and we don't know how this vaccine is going to work. It's 90% successful. They just canceled the trial in China. A lot of hope out there. A lot of people think this would be the end of it. And right now, to be brutally honest, no one really knows. Okay, so if you don't know, first rule of forecasting, you don't know, don't make any wrong assumptions. So, now, the number one variable of all of them that has the most predictive value of future population change is the age structure of the population. Now this is from the 2010 census. I know that's 10-year-old data. What good is that? Well, it's like balancing your checkbook. You have to have a good opening balance before you can add and subtract. And any errors in your opening balance is just going to run right through your balance of the checkbook. The market works the same way. This is the best, most solid numbers we have, and we can calculate from that. And it tells you a lot about the district. And very easy to read. Your 0 to 4 population, that's your preschoolers. 5 to 9 is elementary, 10 to 14 is middle school, 15 to 19 is high school. 20 to 34 years old is referred to as family formation ages. 80% of all births occur between the ages of 20 and 34 years old. Despite what you've read in the popular press, fertility rates have not changed much in the last 40 years. They stayed a nice tight 15% band between 2.0 and 1.7 kids per woman in her lifetime. If you want to know what a 0.7 kid looks like, go to Ohio State. They have a lot of good. Says the Bowling Green graduate. So when you see changes in number of births, it's not due so much to changes in the birth rate, but rather the number of women in prime childbearing age. You can have a total fertility rate of 9. You don't have women between ages of 20 and 34 years old, you're not going to have to make births. So it's a driving factor. 35 to 54 are the ages where most people have kids in school. Okay, so when you have board meetings with a lot of people here, those are the ages of their parents. Now, there's exceptions to that. I was one of them. I was a first-time father at 40 because I was 58 when my son was in high school. And at graduation, everybody told me what a nice, well-behaved grandson I had. So I get that. We're the exceptions. Okay, but here's where it gets in. This is where people start thinking demographically. 55 to 69 is what we refer to as the empty nest households. Okay? So you get the Smith family down the road there, lived in the same house for 20 years. 10 years ago, there was 4 people in the household, but today there's 2 because their kids graduated, went off to college. The household size has dropped. Still occupied household, but half the population. Back when we were on migration for a while, by the way. So if you've got more and more people, and you see that you did this over the last 10 years, aging into the late 50s into their 60s, there'll be more and more empty nesters. Okay? They're still occupied, but no kids coming out. I use my dad's house like Fort Wayne as an example. At one time, we had 4 kids who were local school district out of the household. Hasn't been a school-age kid come out there since 1976 and won't be until dad sells the home, moves out, and the young son moves in. My next door neighbors, that's turned over twice in that period, you know. So it varies from type of site, but as long as the original homeowner's there, until they move out, there's very, very few kids come home, hey, mom, dad, we'll get married, we live in your basement, you have kids down there. No, kids coming home is a short-term thing. You know, it's not really just, you know, move in there, take care of mom and dad, and just regenerate within 20 years. It's very, very rare to see it happen. 70 and over is your turnover population. Okay, those are the homeowners, particularly if they're in single-family tax homes, that will be downsizing over the next 10 years. Now, clearly, you can see you're going to have an increase from 2010 in the number of homes turning over. That population's, you know, bigger bars than we were 70 over. But the number of householders going from the early 50s to the late 50s is growing at a faster pace. So your downsizing is happening at a slower rate than your empty nesting. And that's why you see a downward pressure on enrollment. So now, building is where you make up the difference with that. Now, if you have enough building going on to make up for the gap of those 2 trends, then you can break even and go forward. All right? But this now, 2 things here. This is also like your demographic fingerprint. No 2 geographic areas have the exact size and shape of the demographic population pyramid. I've got 2 examples. Your report we sent you has a pyramid for each one of your attendance areas. Now, I've chosen 2 as examples here, and you'll notice that none of these attendance areas look exactly like the district as a whole. Okay? The first one is Utica. Okay? And I picked Utica for a reason. It has one of the highest proportions of home ownership in the area. So you tend to have people who move in, tend to be young, tend to still be having kids, move up areas, building going on, things like that. And you'll notice that the largest population was in the 35 to 39 ages, which are now in their late 40s. So they all got kids in school, they're headed for middle and high school, but unless there's a lot of building going on out there, there'll be a lot more empty nesting in the next 10 years. Okay? Notice that very few people in the 20 to 24, 20, 25, 29 age bracket, that's your young formation of households. You don't come out of college and buy a house. You come out of college and rent an apartment. Then you get married, start having kids. But no one wants to raise their kids in an apartment. They got the economic resources to do so. So you start looking for your starter home out in the suburbs. So a lot of people move here from Louisville, come across the bridge, pay the $4 toll every day. I remember that bridge was free, by the way. You know, and that's basically your migration flow. So they'll start in areas with large numbers of apartments and move out to areas with large numbers of and these existing or new family homes. The second example I've got is Parkwood. And I pick Parkwood because it has one of the highest proportions of households that live in apartments. Okay, it kind of backs up that whole family formation thing. Lots of people in their late 20s, okay, as large as number. Notice how the 0 to 4 bar is bigger than the 5 to 9, okay? That's because they're all young, they're all starting their families in that area. Now, if you go forward 5 to 10 years, you would find these apartments, a large number of people still in their late 20s, a lot of 0 to 4-year-olds. You would expect that 5 to 9-year elementary enrollment to increase in the 5 years. It didn't. Why? Because people living in apartments wanted to go out and move to the suburbs, which is another factor to look about. I used move to Louisville as an example because you do have core areas not only here in Clarksville and New Albany on this side of the river. They have a lot of apartments. They can move relatively short distance in Indiana. Some could start their households and apartments in the district and move out to single-family attached homes in other parts of the district. Okay, not all of your households moving in out in this area are coming from outside the district. Some are just moving within the district, and that's quite common actually. So we need to understand these demographic dynamics by area, and we have some charts to go through here. And again, the main focus here is to look at how different these areas are at. About 32% of the households have under 18 population. That includes school age. Numbers been sliding down the last 10 years too. That's why it's so hard to get bond issues passed in this country right now. There's not a school district in the United States where households with school-age kids make up a majority. Last one was in Utah about 15 years ago. Okay, so you're going out, you're outnumbered 2 to 1 before you even start on the bonds. Okay, household size, real crude measurement here, real crude. Mom, dad, whatever the point is the average kid yield. Okay, so 2.42 for the district. Real crude measure, you get about 0.4 under 18 population per household. It already gets really crude. Don't put too much into it. But for comparison's sake, look at Franklin Square, 2.05. Look at New Washington, 2.64. So it's 0.6 difference. Well, that 0.6 is more likely kids. It doesn't sound like a lot until you multiply it times 1,700 households. You know, 800 kids. A lot of difference there. You know, the reason why Franklin's is so small is because there's a lot of single people living in that area that don't have kids. There are little apartments there too. But you see a wide variation. So you start to see now why you wouldn't use a district level model for all of your attendance areas. You get so much different variation between your attendance areas. In fact, demographically speaking, the only thing Franklin Square and New Washington have in common is both happen to be in the Greater Clark School District. You know, completely different demographic dynamics. Householders 3554, the ones most of the kids in school, 38.6 for the district. But again, a wide range. You know, Parkwood at 33, you got New Washington 42, Utica 44. There's a lot of range in there. Householders over 65. This is a very important measure. It's going to tell me how many potential households could be turning over in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And it's 21.8 that's been going up. That tells a lot of households that have potentially going to turn over after the year 2020 and they get in their 70s. But again, 17% Riverside, going up to a high 22 in New Washington, 25 in Wilson. And the most important one on this one, percent of homeowners who own their home, owners versus renters, called housing tenure demography. About 2/3 of the district, but again, you've got a low here of 46, majority renters in Franklin Square, again, 85% in New Washington, 89% in Thomas Jefferson. Owners and renters have two pretty different demographic dynamics. Renters tend to be younger, and by that nature, the younger they're poor, are still forming their families, a lot of preschoolers in it, and they're moving average every 18 months. Homeowners tend to be older, that makes them richer, have completed their family formation, so most of their kids are either in school, a few preschoolers, and they move in average every 14 years. So one's a very mobile population, still having kids, one's a much more static population, living at all. who have completed their family formation. So that proportion of owner versus renter in the area, again, very, very key dynamic. Also in there is income. There's a great rule in demography. You can have money, you can have kids, but you can't have both. And there's a parent knows what we're talking about. So as income goes up, number of kids go down, and they tend to be older. And the poorer you are, you know, it's a great chicken and egg question in demography. Are you rich because you have fewer kids, or you have fewer kids because you're rich? But we don't have income data, but we do have median rent and home value, which are very strongly correlated to income. So we can use that as a factor also. Last but not least, percent of single-person households. One of my favorite questions from a board member of another district I will not name was asking me once, how many kids can we expect in a single-person households? And I said, none. So, again, these are usually young people starting out. This variable is very heavily correlated with home tenure. Again, 30% of the households in the district are single-person households. So, people always find shocking how high that number is. And it runs, again, Franklin Square at 45, not surprising given all the apartments. Low down at 18%. Utica is mostly single-family detached homes. Percent single-person over 65. Okay, that's a key one because they're single person. This is a lot of cases where the spouse has died. This is in households, not in assisted living centers, anything like that. And this identifies areas we have a lot of turnover population, a lot of homes moving in the market over the next 10 years. At Wilson, Parkwood, Franklin Square, Bridgeport, and Highlands. Now, on the housing market, we use Zillow and Realty Tracker. Okay. You can get right down to the address level. See how many have been sold, what the price is, what's on the market. What we realize is everything about your home is public domain data. Always has been. When I started out 30 years ago, we used to have to go to courthouse to get this data. Now it's all on the internet. Always had to have two data sources. Zillow is better for home sales. Realty Track is better for foreclosures. Anybody use Realty Track? Go home, do so. Type in, we buy the data, but Eagle Free promo, type in your address, and you'll get a little 1 mile radius map of your area, and you can see who all your friends and neighbors are behind the mortgage. Great way to find something that's got the party. Foreclosure, your foreclosure, it's all out there, folks. That's your privacy violation. It's the thing about your house. So now, this is my favorite data from the 2010 census. Okay, we look at each one of your tenants area, individual year of age, which correlates. Now, in 2010, the 5-year-olds are kindergarten, 6-year-olds are first grade, 7 to second, go on and on. By 2015, those under 1-year-olds are now 5 years old. They're kindergarten, 1-year-olds are first grade, second, third, and we can track the cohort sizes. Why is this important? Well, if someone sees their enrollment go up in an area, go down, they go, oh, we're people moving in, they're moving out, they're transferring, or the first thing that pops in my mind is, well, this is a big or small cohort. And a great example here, if you look at Thomas Jefferson, okay, 1-year-old to 53, 2-year-old to 76, 3-year-old to 58, okay. So you get this cohort coming, there's 20 students. So you should see a 20 student increase. Well, went to the local school, and it should drop back by 20 the next year. So you're trying to identify all the factors that are causing increases, decreases at the individual tenants area. And we do something called the market sheet, which is the next slide. Now, in the audience, it's very hard to read. My apologies. But what it is we take the under 1 cohort and match your 2015 data, that's your kindergartners, and we compare it to what the number of kid count in the census was, and we calculate a percentage. Now, no school gets 100% of their students, okay? But the next year, those under 1s are first graders, 2016, 17, they're second graders, third, fourth, they're fifth graders by 2020. And we can track that over time. This is how we also measure your transfer rate too. And if the percentage is going up, it's in migration. If it's going down, it's either out migration or transfers. And this is how we identify your age-specific migration factors. It's been my experience over the years that when a third grader moves, they tend to take the whole family with them. So you can generalize that, how the rest of the family's doing. And you can see, you're seeing a slight increase across all your ages. So you've got a sustained migration flow. And that's our thing. Who's moving in and who's moving out? Because all areas have both going on, okay? Now, we're further aided in this. We had your student geocoding. And this is what makes this whole forecasting method, demographic thing work, is it allows us to put the kids back into their home attendance areas by geocoding. So if you look at this, on the first column, you have Bridgeport, okay? And the ones across the top, that's how many kids live in that area. And going down the side, 343, that's how many kids attend that school. The number in green is the number of kids who both live and attend in an attendance area. And the numbers going down, Franklin Square 19 to Washington 2, North Haven 41, that's the kids that live in the area and go someplace else. So you get 114 that live there and go someplace else, 72 that live in some other attendance area and move in. When you have a lot of mobility within your attendance areas, that breaks down the correlation demographic variable called systematic error, okay? Well, this gets rid of it. This puts all the kids back in their home attendance area. So we can correlate the demographic trends, the housing trends, to what your population enrollment's doing. Very, very key factor. And so you've got some areas that are very large receivers of out of attendance area children, and some that are very large senders. Well, this neutralizes that problem, okay? And we can also do it at the middle school level, puts them all back in the whole middle school area, and then also for the high school areas, okay? And you've got some unmatched, there's always going to be a small percentage, usually less than 0.1%, 0.2%, and you get some out-of-district ones as well. But this allows us to put kids back in their home areas and correlate it to demographic variables. Now, all of this goes into the building of the fertility, mortality, migration models for each attendance area, and it sums up in the district total. This is the district as an example. There's two ways to read this, okay? You can follow an age group over time, 5 to 9, which is your elementary. So it's 4,700 in 2010, over 5,015, 20, 25, 30. Or follow a cohort through time. 0 to 4 in 2010 are 5 to 9 and 15, 10 to 14 in 2020, 15 to 19 in 25, and then 2024. Okay. Real overview on this. Your biggest in-migration flows are people ages 25 to 44 years old, bringing 0 to 9-year-olds with them. Your biggest out-migration flow is, not surprisingly, 18 to 22-year-olds going off to college. You have a high post-secondary rate. They go off to college. The problem is they don't come back. Okay, all of the kids ought to come back. No, they don't. There's a great way to test that theory. This year, the classes of 15, 10, and 05 had over 5, 10, 15 year reunions. Go to reunions, talk to the alumni, and see how many still live in the district. If it's 20%, you're doing good. Okay. For the 2 high school seniors who graduate, move away, and don't come back, each one new household to move in just replace their lost fertility to break even. You don't marry the boy or girl next door anymore now. You marry the boy or girl next door. Going all over the place. Okay? Your second biggest out-migration flow, 70 plus. Downside is going someplace else. All right. Now you'll notice that these numbers in the center column between 10 and 15. That's the components of change for that 5-year period. 4,200 births. You see it drop slightly. Not because of a drop in the fertility rate, but a reduction in the number of women by childbearing age. You see the deaths going up. It's not COVID, it's not anything. You just get more people what we call prime dying age. I don't know if I find a better term than that, but I used to refer prime dying age, they go over the age of 60, but now that I'm 64, they go over the age of 80. So, but natural increase is the excess of birth over death. And you'll notice by 25 to 30, it goes negative. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the demographic trend of the next 20 years, okay? The United States this year was, even before COVID, was expected to break 3 million deaths for the first time in our history. We already have, and this is before COVID also, we have 4 states in the country that have more deaths than births. West Virginia, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Maine. We have 800 counties in the United States with more deaths than births. There's 7 counties in Indiana with more deaths than births. And that number would do nothing but go up over the next year. Demographic factor, the aging of the baby boom. The front end of the boom is 75 this year. The peak is 65, the back end is 56. You have more people being over the age of 70 every year. Okay. My favorite statistics, 10,000 baby boomers in this country turn 65 every day. And we'll continue to do that for the next 5 years. And by 2025, 10,000 baby boomers will turn 70 every day. Overwhelming demographic trend. Net migration, Autumn, 1,500 people moving in those last 5 years, it's net. You got about 7,500 moving in, you have 6,000 moving out. A lot of mobility in this area, but it's still net positive. Okay. All this information goes to driving the enrollment forecast, and that's it for the district. All right, now a couple of trends here, very, very important. We've done, I'm going to say probably 5,000 school districts in the last 30 years across the country. Okay, and we do evaluations on each district. I will call up superintendent next September, ask for ABM numbers, and we'll do an evaluation of how the forecasts are doing in the first 10 years, first 3 years of the forecast. It's in that 2% band. And we're doing that for all of our districts right now. Out of 200 we've reviewed so far, there's been 8 districts that have an increase in enrollment this year. You guys are one. Okay. Very, very, very. Let me give you an example. We're doing Vigo County right now. We're doing 17. And their 2018 number, they had 14,636 students. We nailed it right in the nose. That's what we forecasted. The next year, 2019, we were 14 students too high. This year, we're 500 students too high. There's your COVID effect. Okay. Usually run between 3 to 7%. Again, you guys, something different going on there. And that difference is probably reduction of transfer. We won't know for sure how much we'll get those transfer numbers in December or January. I've got your last 3 years' numbers here. You had been averaging net about 1,100 out. All it would take would be a reduction down to 800, and that would explain the number right there. So that's my, and right now, we're not going to know for sure, but that's my theory. I'll stick with it until I get some kind of empirical proof to go otherwise. Because I did not see anything demographically out there that would warrant 152 student rise this year. Not enough building, not enough home sales, things like that. So now, if you look at the long-term trend, I'm sure more people expect more growth than that, but there's the cohort effect. And the analogy I use here is a bucket of water. Okay? If I have a bucket of water, I'm pouring water in the top, there's a hole in the bottom. As long as I'm pouring in fast, it's going out the bottom, the level will rise. But if for some reason the hole in the bottom is bigger, and it's going out fast and I'm pouring in, you don't pour in at the same rate, level will drop. And enrollment works the same way. Once the size of K1 cohort is coming in, the size of the 12th grade cohort is going out. And that's what you got going on in the future. Over the last 6 years, your 12th grade cohorts have averaged 740 students. Over the next 10 years, they're going to average about 790. So you need 50 more people coming in, either K1 or moving in sometime in late elementary grades, just to keep the same growth rates to break even. Okay, because you got bigger cohorts going out, and you can see it starting in 24. Your 12th grade cohort break 800. You know, you're gonna have more and more, that's the key part of that. So that's why you guys see more curve linear. Now overall, it's positive. You've got a strong housing market, you got a lot of building going on, got a lot of people trying to, move into the area. Transportation system, I'm not gonna go down that road. Driving around here is a bit of an adventure. They all wave at you though, they just all seem to have industrial access, you miss the fingers. The benefits are there, Now, you've got also a strong area of apartments. You have people coming, you don't have to be totally dependent upon people coming out of New Albany or Louisville. Down Jefferson, the apartment, you move in there, start the family, then move out this direction, okay? The question becomes, how many of those homeowners are put homes in the market? And I'll close on this point with the housing market here, because I get this all the time. You look out there right now, not just this area, but all over the country, you think it's a white hot housing market, okay? Builders, you built down, example of Port Road, there's built to be banned there and other places. A house goes on the market, existing home in this area, it's sold in like 2 weeks, the full price, if not more. So anecdotally, looking like, oh my God, it's a booming housing market. Anybody here in the real estate business? Okay. What's the supply like right now?
What?
Supply of homes.
It's very, very low.
Very, very low, all-time low, right? Yeah, and
Just
I hear that from all of them too. What, the elderly just aren't moving, okay? And it's not just here, it's all over. First off, they have no place to go. Second, they're scared out of their wits. Third thing is, I'm gonna hunker down in place, I'm gonna hunker down where I know, I got friends, family support system, our doctors here, things like that. They're just not moving. So as long as that situation persists, and it will for a while here until we get something that what the new normal is gonna be, a new home goes up, and the builders are desperate trying to catch up with it, okay? But again, they're only 15-20% of the housing market. You can't make up for all of it, okay? So if existing home, if you're gonna sell your home, this is the time to do it, folks. You get top dollar if you go in 2 weeks, Until that situation changes, and it will, because you're gonna have a large number of elderly in their 70s, late 70s, in this decade, they're gonna have to put the homes in the market, okay? Now, you may have the other sex situation there too, you have a glut, You have literally got a couple million baby boomers can put their homes in the market every year. And that's going to vary from area to area. It depends on how many homeowners you have over the age of 70 in the area. Now, the wild card there is if all of them decide to move, okay? Well, if I drop dead tomorrow, I don't have any choice other than that. The house is going for sale. So mortality becomes an issue. And that's where you might see some COVID effect in there, because it does have a much higher mortality rate for over 65 population. So that's where we're at right now. And I know I've gone over my 20 minutes. My sincere apologies, but us old college professors, once you get us going, you can't shut us up. So, questions? Sir?
Did you, whenever you did your forecast back in 2006, how did those compare with 2009 and 2010? Did what you saw in 2009 and 10 meet what you predicted or what you anticipated from 2006 or the year ago?
It did, because we got in a lot of trouble then because we pretty much called the housing bust, and we got fired from about 20 school districts for that. Developers just had us for lunch. Of course, they all came back and hired us again in 2012, and we turned out to be right. There was no way they could sustain that boom. Hendricks County District was a great example of that. There was actually no way that boom could sustain.
Have you factored in what the possibilities of a dramatic change in the direction that the nation is going to be going for the next this election? I'm not trying to be political, but I mean, one candidate wants one thing, another candidate wants something fairly far away from that, and we don't know which one's going to be in there yet.
Well, it's a good idea, and I won't go down that road either.
Right.
The honest answer doesn't make much difference.
Well, what I'm wondering about is, do you have an alternative, if, you know, one alternative or the other alternative, and we could, to use for the superintendent and his staff to be able to start
It
planning?
doesn't make that much difference demographically, no.
Okay.
It's, you know, foreign immigration is a fraction of what it was 15 years ago. It's like here, political, you know, there's a certain political entity out there to have you believe there's millions of illegal aliens trying to swim the Rio Grande on a daily basis. The largest foreign immigration flow in this country now, and for like the last 8 years, has been from Asia. That's been from Latin America. You know, the fastest growing minority group in the country is Asia. The biggest one is Hispanic, but not because it's coming in from Hispanic countries, because they're so young, they're having kids. The fertility rate for all race ethnic groups are not that much different. It's all on age structure. Interstate, inter-area mobility is at all-time lows. So the real factor, and I don't think either Biden or Trump can affect this, is the aging process of the baby boom. Now, either candidate can slow that down, sign me up, I'm all for it. I'm a peak boomer.
What about the interest rates of the 1,000 homes?
Oh, they've got that so screwed up. There's no way they're gonna get those interest rates back up again. You can't dump $4 trillion of liquidity in the market. They've linked themselves to the Fed funds rate down under 1% for the next decade, no matter who's in there.
Okay.
They've got it so screwed up. I don't know. I don't know who can fix that. So I'm pretty confident this 30-year rates are gonna stay below 4.5%.
Okay, that
That's
was the only thing I was.
something really devastating. It takes something really devastating, like someone blows up the Saudi oil field. It would take something of that magnitude.
When I looked at your original presentation that you just gave here, I was looking at that 1,000, and then I was looking at the interest rates, and I was concerned that those might change pretty dramatically, but you pointed out something I didn't think of.
I think unemployment is going to have more of an impact than interest rates on that one. I think there's much more variability in that factor because realistically, most new home buyers, either starter homes or new homes, are households with 2 incomes.
Okay.
So you can have one of them still working, they're still doing okay, but if one spouse has lost a job, you're not going to go out and buy a house. Okay. So I think that's the drag there. Okay. Now both will lose if you're out, and that's when the foreclosure kicks in.
Right.
Okay. So you really got to look at the two income household is now the norm. You know, so where we moved beyond single income households. It's like single income households as a rule don't buy houses. They get a mortgage.
Excuse me, I have a question. On the demographic study, have you noticed over a period of time that we have probably stayed on a certain level as far as enrollment, where people were adding Greater Park? I know years back, we were at one height and then we hit a low and then we start climbing back up.
You know, that's a really good question. It kind of ties into what Jim was talking about in the 06 and 07. Of course, the big change between now and then was there was no open enrollment then. That's your wild card factor, okay? Your population has gone up in the district faster than your enrollment has, and the reason why it hasn't gone up as fast is because of transfers. I mean, you're losing another 1,000 a year. That's a lot of kids, okay? So, and that's the real problem of doing forecasting in Indiana right now is, okay, what's the change due to demographic or socioeconomic factors or whatever? What's due to transfers, okay? And this area is kind of unique because you surround Clarksville, you know. So you need mobility in and out here a little bit. You know, same problem in Floyd County too. And it's all over the state. You know, you see, you know, John Glenn lives in the South Bend now. That are raising kids all over the place. And what's the 5,500 kids a student or adult student now? What, Sean?
More than that.
More than that, okay. So, you know, if you don't need a lot of building going on to have your enrollment go up. You should a lot of kids to come back from other districts, which I suspect you did this year. Okay. Now I'll be the first to tell you, if that trend continues in 21, 22, 23, I'm going to be too low. I'll tell you that right now, because I held a constant.
Well, that was going to be my question. You know, plus or minus 2%.
Yeah.
You know, that 10,656 by 2030,
Mhm.
you know, what factors would make that go the 2% higher, or, you know, up to closer to 11,000?
Well, I'll still add that exactly.
But what I was gonna say again on, maybe picking up on what Mark was saying, when you were talking about, if you have a plot, and, you know, like the building, I noticed up on 62 at one time, I forgot where the Springs or whatever that area is, they had a plot for 425 homes, but they only put about 10 in if there were that many. So, but now I notice that they have expanded and still growing there, so that could mean some increase.
Right, and there was a lot of, I mean, go back to the point the gentleman said, for back in the housing bust, a lot of the quote, new home subdivisions are being laid out, not just in Indiana, but all over the Midwest, and particularly the Northeast, that were planned, platted, and approved in 7, 8, and 9 are now getting built in 7, 18, and 19, you know. So I put that permitted in there. So they're probably catching up with it. But the example I use on that is, suppose a developer comes in, we used it up in Lebanon last week. Guy wants to come in and build 1,000 homes, 100 a year, 10-year build out, which makes sense if you think about it. That's about how much. You buy a home in that first phase, first 100 year. You move in, you get a first grader and a third grader, okay? By the time they've got the last 100 built, 10 years later, those kids are in high school and college, okay? There's that time factor right there. They're all going to move in, so kind of going down different roads. You got to be real careful with that. The other thing is price too. Are they starter homes, 200, 225? That's going to draw a whole different kind of household than move-up homes, 400, 450. I mean, very few people will drop nearly $500,000 in a house and say, hey, I'm having a kid. Now you're done by that point, you know.
So basically, with some of the new apartments that's being built downtown, they be single, you know, man and wife.
Yeah.
But then when they start to plan for their family,
Right.
then they begin to look for a senior citizen moving out. Supposedly the downside, and most seniors don't downsize here.
Right.
So, okay. But you know, the other statistic, when you were talking about 1.7 and 2.0.
Yeah.
When I came out of college in 71, they were using that same figure.
Yeah.
Hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed, no. And one of my favorite statistics, it just finished, the National Center for Health just finished up a study of baby fertility, they're finally all done. And they concentrated on the birth rate. I thought the fascinating number was 80% of all baby boom women never had a child. 18% more only had one. So you think about that. More than a third of all baby boomers had one child or less. Now, your school board meetings, people who don't have kids don't go to school board meetings, you know. So you look over the audience, oh, they all have kids. Well, yeah, it's only a third of the households, you know, so. Or you had kids, they all graduated and moved away. Like, my whole street's empty nester now. Like 10 years ago, there was a whole bunch of school-aged kids on that street, not anymore. We're starting to get a few more back because some homes have turned over, and they're the ones now running through my garden and flower bed and all that, you know, so it's a problem going around, but it's all there. Now, back to your point, sir, and this is I think a very key point for your future planning, and that is a double-edged sword, go both ways. You've got probably a couple hundred, maybe 300 back this year transfers. I'll be shocked if the transfer numbers don't show that when they come out. They just as easily could go that other direction. Okay? And it is very difficult for districts in Indiana to plan when you've got that much variability in your numbers. Penn Harris Mass in a couple of weeks, they got 1,500 kids coming in around the district. They're living and dying with that money right now. But all it takes is one scandal and it drops to 700. You know? So it's a very precarious position to play. Now, the advantage for Greater Clark is the potential for going up is much greater than the potential for going down. Okay? You don't have to have them move, you have to have them come back. Things like that. Or don't have them transfer to the other agencies. So what I'm saying is, but you have to have a base at least to work off of. So on your demographic side, you can pretty much look at this. Now, again, when you do Penn Harris Mass and stuff, they have resident students and they have transfer students. We can track the two of them. Any difference in transfer, we can take off the top. And their resident numbers have transfer held up pretty well on this. So just by your own demographic devices, you should see some modest growth, you know. But it can be great growth if you cut that transfer.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that 20% of the sales, or home sales, are the new homes being built, right?
On average, it's
On the average.
between 10 and 20%, given the area of the year.
And then 80%, or somewhere around
80%,
there,
yeah.
are homes that people are moving out of and new people moving in.
Yeah, existing home sales,
Okay.
yeah.
In our area, we're seeing, I live in downtown. In my area, we're seeing a lot of, and I don't know which bucket this will go in. We're seeing a lot of houses that have been sitting vacant.
Right.
I mean, dumps, that people are coming in and flipping.
Mhm.
Putting a lot of money into it, flipping,
Yep.
families are moving. Is that considered a new home sale, or is that considered?
Existing.
Existing, okay, all right.
It's, and you've got 30,000 households. So 1,000 sounds like a lot. It's 3% of your housing stock. You know, which is about average from the average most areas. You get out to, you know, boom areas like in Texas, in Florida, you might see that up to 5 or 6%. You get up to areas like, we got to pick on Youngstown, Ohio, it might be 1%. So, but 3% is about average. But 1,000, that's a lot of houses, you know. And most areas aren't tracking their average right now because, and you know, it's the paradox here. I mean, it looks like a white hot market because everything's selling so quickly, but the numbers is not up there enough. Now, the housing market is cyclical by year. Most people buy between April and August because that's when their kids will move, and we're in a trough right now, so you've got a seasonally adjusted rate for that. So, but again, if the supply would start picking up, maybe in the spring it will, okay? Hopefully it will, but it's got a long way to go right now. And it's not so much, you've got people who want to move in. There's a lot of people who move in here who just need to find a home they can afford in the area they want to live into. You stick those nasty empty nesters to move out.
We appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you have any other questions come up, we'll you, Mark, and Laura has this spiel on how she does it. No matter where I am in the country, she tracks me down.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind. So, in looking at this study, and people can go anywhere that they want to, but you've got an area growing, and you really need a place to school there. So, you know where I'm going?
I was hoping I could get out here with someone else's question. And I almost made it. Okay. A, I look at that. B, it depends on capacity. C, it depends on what the state of your buildings are at. You've got a lot of students going to attendance areas that they're not assigned to. There's a lot of internal mobility in here, okay? All of those factors need to be examined in detail with a geographic study and a demographic study to ascertain, A, do you need a school, B, where do you need it, and C, how big does it need to be, okay? And I'll throw one thing out there that, and we're doing about 8 projects on that right now. We're doing about 8 more, we're closing schools. And my hair was dark before I started closing schools. Districts who are building schools, elementaries, they're all 600 students or bigger. Every single one. We just helped Cabarrus County, North Carolina, draw new boundaries for a new school, the elementary school, K-5. It's a 1,200 student K-5 building. Next one I saw in my life. It's like a damn high school.
But some of that is due to the finance that they're
Oh,
receiving.
no, no, no.
You don't think so?
No, not at all. No, if that was the case, they'd build and develop them. Now, it's education today. You gotta remember, and again, this is a point I've been beating on school districts. When you build a building, okay, whatever it's gonna cost on that, wherever you put it, you're stuck with it for 80 years, 70, 80 years, okay? And the attendance area that building serves will turn over demographic at least 3 times during that period. Now, the problem here, you go back 50 years, when a lot of schools were built, where are all people living? You all being Clarkville, Jeffersonville, okay? It's all very constant, that's where all the schools were at, okay? Very high population density, and they average about 4 kids per household. Today, they're averaging 2 kids per household spread all over the place. So when you spot that new school, you need to build it in an area, because you're gonna have to redistrict every 15 to 20 years, whether you like it or not, because the distribution of kids is going to change from the distribution of your seats or not, okay? And one great example in Cobb County, Georgia, okay, where they drank the Kool-Aid and went back for seconds. They built schools 350, a mile and a half apart on land that the developers gave them, okay? 10 years later, you couldn't get a busload of elementary age kids out of the subdivisions. They all moved in with young kids and they all ate through the system. And their attendance area boundaries now in the country of Chile trying to stretch out enough, get enough kids from the schools, and the growth went to the west, and they're stuck with it that way now for 50 years, okay? Just absolutely, their transportation budget tripled in 10 years. Because they wouldn't listen. Because they're Atlanteans and they know better than everybody else.
Thank you very much.
So you gotta
Thank you.
be careful, now, what you build, where you build.
Just out of curiosity, do you teach this at the university?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I teach at Untitled University in Estonia. I've been there doing that for 6 years now. Last domestic university I taught at was Eastern Connecticut. That was 20 years ago now. So,
Well, thank you
that's
very much. Very
reputation in Estonia that I do here, so.
Really informative, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is policy analytics.
Good evening, Board. I'd like to introduce to you Jason O'Neill. He is the number guy, the money guy portion of the demographer, right? It talks about our growing assessed value and our properties and the components that make up our taxing district. Jason and I have worked together for a lot of years and holds a lot of respect for the state of Indiana. And I will tell you, he kind of will brag enough about himself. Thank you, Doctor. He has been spot on in a district that I was at before where the assessed value had fluctuated so intensely. But with his numbers and his study, they're spot on. So we did put in front of you the detailed report. We were working on it even at this morning because you're constantly updating your numbers. And so he has summarized that report for you for a better understanding and relatable to what our mission is and what our budget presentation had come to you with. So with that, Jason, through to you.
I'll unmask myself as well. Thank you, Laura. It's good to be with you this evening. I'm Jason O'Neill with Policy Analytics. We're a small firm based in Indianapolis, and we focus primarily on fiscal and economic analysis for taxing units really throughout the state. So cities, schools, other governmental units, help them deal with complex fiscal and financial issues. Where we typically work with schools is on tax base and property tax revenue analysis and forecasting. And so that's what I'm going to talk about with you today. It's a changing world, and as Dr. McKibben said, we work with Dr. McKibben's data in a number of schools throughout the state, and he is very highly regarded. So I commend his analysis to you as well. I'm going to get started here. We're going to go through three major points. We're going to go through a little bit of history on your tax base, what the composition is, some profile information, so you can understand how your tax base is changing and what's going on with that. We're going to go through a high-level forecast of what you can expect in terms of tax base changes in the future, and then focus on the property tax revenue implications of those. Happy to take questions as we go through this or at the end. That is up to you. First, why is tax base analysis important? Why are we going through this exercise? It's definitely not so you have better trivia answers about amount of assessed value or number of homes in the tax base. It's because there are real revenue implications here. Tax base is a component of your property tax rate. Property tax rate is very simple. It's the levy, the amount of property taxes that you're seeking to raise, divided by the tax base. So the tax base is an important component of that rate. And it helps to determine three major issues fiscally for the school. It is a determinant of your tax base capacity. You know, that's something that Laura has been talking with you quite a bit here in the last weeks and months since you set up your budget. It also determines circuit breaker loss, how much revenue you lose from the property tax rate cap, so we can go into that in the future. And it also, very importantly, is a major factor in the tax liability for your taxpayers. So it helps to determine that. So those are all things that you want to keep an eye on. There are a couple of major buckets of revenue that local schools are funded by: state tuition support, which is primarily student-driven, which is the reason to do demographic forecasts like we just went through. Local property taxes, which is where we'll be focusing our attention, and then federal grants, funds, others, food service, title, other types of grants. Well, our conversation this evening is going to focus on local property taxes. So first I want to dive into tax base analysis. The first thing I want to do here is get an overall lay of the land. This is a map of your taxing jurisdiction, and the colors there, this is also, there's a map like this in your report, represent the different taxing districts within Clark County, Greater Clark County Schools taxing jurisdiction. So a taxing district is a geographically coterminous area with a consistent tax rate. That means the overlapping taxing units are all the same. So what you're seeing here is that you have a lot of different taxing districts within the school corporation. Really an unusually high amount for even the school corporation boundaries this large. It means you've got a number of different municipalities in here, a number of different townships, and other different determinants of tax rates. So what that means is that when you make a property tax policy decision, it may affect taxing taxpayers differentially. So we'll get into that as we go here. So that's the lay of the land. This is by property class, how your assessed value has changed over the last 8 years. So this is showing the acronym there is for little GAV, that's the black line, that stands for gross assessed value, which is the market value of the tax base by different components. We've indexed this to 2012, and so it all starts at 2012 and shows the percentage change since 2012. Property classifications there are somewhat self-identified. One to note is the blue dotted line personal property. That's depreciable personal property, and so that's actually plant and equipment that's assessed as part of the tax base, typically at commercial and industrial sites. That's the only component of the tax base that's not real property. You can see that there's a good story here. There's a lot of growth. In other places throughout the state, there's not as much growth. But you can see that it's mostly since 2016. We had a period of relative stagnation after the recession before you led into that period of growth. One thing that's notable about the tax base change here is that it's led actually by commercial, industrial, personal property. In a lot of places throughout the state, we'll see the red line, which is residential, either essentially overlap the black line, which means that the residential tax base really determines the overall tax base, or be a little bit higher than that. But what we're seeing here is that actually the commercial and industrial tax base is providing more growth. Now, there are a lot of policy factors to that. One thing that we know about is in commercial industrial growth that occurs within TIF districts or in a place like River Ridge, which is, I'm sure, an area you're familiar with. That doesn't automatically get added to the school's tax base, except for referendum or other scenarios. But it does show the level of economic investment that's coming into the region. So next thing that I'm going to look at here is the composition of assessed value growth. It shows residential is about 63% of your overall tax base, commercial industrial 22%, agricultural 5%, and personal 10%. This is a relatively diversified tax base based on what we see across the state. There's a mix here between residential and then the commercial, industrial, and personal. One thing that's often surprising to people is the small piece of the pie that's represented by agricultural property. That's often because if we flip back to the map, agricultural property is a large geographic component of your tax base. It takes up a lot of acres. But agricultural property is assessed at about $1,200 an acre, so it takes a lot of acres to even equal the property value for a house or a restaurant. So that's one of the reasons why we see it as a smaller proportional piece of your tax base. There has been change in the state policy on how agricultural property is assessed over the last several years. It's gone down, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. That has been a major area of risk for a lot of more rural school corporations. But what it's showing is that you're not as exposed to that level of risk from reducing farmland assessed values. This is assessed value change from 19 to 20. Before we get too far into this, it should go through the timing and the sequencing of how these numbers work. What we're looking at here is the assessed value for taxes payable in 2019 versus the assessed value for taxes payable in 2020. There is a lag between when the market activity is assessed. So the assessments are January 1st of a given calendar year. So property that was assessed in January 1st, 2020 is for taxes that are payable in 2021. So you're assessed in 1 year for taxes payable in the next year. And it's a market activity essentially for the calendar year that precedes that determines the assessed value. So if an assessed value, or if a property is assessed as of January 1st of 2020, it's the market value or market activity in 2019 that really determines what that assessed value is. So there's really a 2-year lag between when you see the market activity occurring and when the assessed value actually affects property tax revenues. We're also in an interesting time that your certified assessed values for the 2020 paid 2021 tax year were just recently certified in Clark County. They ran a little late due to factors dealing with the recession. They were actually quite a bit later than they usually are. They're usually certified by August, and they were just recently assessed. All of this data is based on parcel level information that we acquired through state submissions, and so we're looking at parcel level information from Clark County. We don't yet have that 2020 paid 2021 parcel data fully in. That won't be in until March, and so we'll be able to update this as we go. But this is showing change in assessed value between pay 19 and pay 2020. You can see overall gross assessed value 6.3%. A large piece of that is commercial industrial. A lot of that is due to combination of downtown development in Jeffersonville and Charlestown, and then also investment coming online at Raven Ridge as well. So just next, touching on farmland, projection of farmland assessed value. This is showing the overall agricultural land that's assessed within your school corporation, how that's changed over time, and a projection or forecast into the future. You can see between 2012 and 2015, there's a big run-up of farmland assessed value, and that's the way the assessment system works. There's a unique set of rules on how agricultural land is assessed. It's based on a multi-year rolling average of productivity rates and commodity prices and that sort of thing. Between 2012 and 2015, that was going up very substantially. So there was a change that was made by the local legislature to change the way that farmland was assessed to reduce that assessed value, and you can see that was really embedded between 2015 and really 2021, and we're projecting that to stabilize in the future. This forecast here is based on a forecast from Purdue, from Dr. Larry DeBoer and his colleagues. We have policy analytics, so specialize in agricultural commodity prices, and so we are adapting that forecast for this purpose. One thing that you will note is there's more drop here between 2015 and 2021 for Greater Clark County than we see in some other areas, and that is partially due to some farmland essentially coming offline for agricultural use, being converted into residential use or other types of use as well. So we're seeing that as a part of the dynamic. This is really just a reference slide when you're looking through this information. It's a detail of how some of these other charts have come together, but it shows the detail of gross assessed value change by property class between 2012 and 2020. Now, as we get into how this affects schools, I do want to go back to the concept of tax rates and how assessed value affects tax rates. So the assessed value is the denominator of the tax rate calculation. That means that assessed value goes up if you hold spending constant, tax rate goes down. If the assessed value goes down and spending is held constant, tax rate goes up. This is the overall district tax rate in the 2020 tax year for each of the tax districts in Clark County schools. So you can see that some of the schools within the taxing jurisdiction are paying a tax rate that's up to 4% or almost 4%. It's really, we call it $4. It's denominated in dollars per $100 of assessed value. Don't ask me why it's denominated that way. That's been the way property taxes have worked in Indiana for decades. But there are other areas that have much lower tax rates. And importantly, the determining factor of that isn't the school tax rate. That's the teal bar there that's the same across the board. It's really the amount of municipal services that these taxpayers are paying for. So the orange bar there is really what is predominantly changing the height of those bars. And varies based on which municipality the taxpayer is living in, if the taxpayer is paying for all municipal services, or for example, just fire services, just park services. There's a number of different iterations. But what is actually causing the variation in tax rate that your taxpayer is seeing are essentially those municipal services. And what that means is that circuit breaker credits affect your taxpayers differentially. This is an important concept that in Indiana, property taxes are capped at the rate level for taxpayers based on their property class. Owner-occupied residential properties, which are called homesteads, are capped at 1% of the assessed value. Non-homestead residential or farmland assessed value is capped at 2% of the assessed value. Commercial industrial property is capped at 3% of the assessed value. You saw here that a lot of those rates are above 3% or above 2%. So if all the taxing units together levy a total tax rate of 4%, then a commercial taxpayer still is only going to pay up to 3% of its assessed value, and the rest is just going to be remain unpaid, and that's what we call the circuit breaker loss taxing units, and that's something that you're familiar with as we get into detail here. But what this is showing is that a large proportion of your taxpayers within incorporated areas of this taxing district are already at their property tax caps. That means no matter what you do with your tax rate, if you increase it to $3 or decrease $3 might be a little too high, but increase it to increase it on the margin, increase it or decrease it. Those taxpayers are capped out, and they're not going to see a change in their tax liability because they're already at their circuit breaker maximum. That's the area in blue in this chart. But the unincorporated taxpayers are by and large not capped out, and so different changes in property tax policy will affect them differentially. It's important to understand that. The one distinction here is that if down the road or in the future you go down the route of a voter-approved referendum for either operations or debt service, that would affect that's outside of the circuit breaker cap and would affect all taxpayers. So a little bit of context of property tax rates. This chart is showing similar schools to Prairie Clark in terms of ADM. So what we've done is we've selected 5 schools above you and 5 schools below you in terms of total ADM for the 2020 tax year and show the total property tax rate. So what this shows is that currently you're right in the middle there of the school population. And even as you go into your budgeted scenario of maintaining a total tax rate of $1.10, that still keeps you right in the middle there of that representative sample of schools. And geographically, this is really interesting. It's really the same story. These are the 3 schools in 2020. I know there's a different situation going into the next year, but this shows the total tax rate between Clarksville, Greater Clark, and West Clark. You can see either at 2020 level or the projected 2021 level of $1.10 on your tax rate, or you're right in the middle there. One of the additional tax-based components that Laura asked us to look into and do some analysis into is tax agreement agencies. You are probably familiar with what this concept is, but it's one of the most flexible economic development tools that are available to Indiana municipalities and counties, and so it's widely used in Indiana. The concept is that that a geographic area is designated as a tax increment or a TIF allocation area, and the increase in assessed value due to new investment is captured not in the tax base of the underlying tax units, the cities and schools, but it's captured in the TIF allocation area. The revenues for that are generally used for payback bonds that were used to develop infrastructure to support the investment. There's a lot of different varieties of how this works, but the overall structure is the same. And TIF is a tool that's widely used in Clark County. As you're probably aware of, all the municipalities have a TIF in some flavor, widely used in Jeffersonville and Charleston. Also, the River Ridge Development Authority has a TIF-like, well, it's really a TIF structure, operates the same as a TIF, so the investment that occurs within that area is also captured in the TIF district. This is something you want to keep an eye on, just to have an overall understanding of the context of what's happening within the school corporation. This is a history of the level of TIF assessed value capture within the school district, just over $750 million in 2020. The actual fiscal impact upon schools really varies contextually based on what's going on. One notable feature about TIF and how it interacts with schools is if there is a referendum down the road, the assessed value from the TIF district does apply to those referendum funds. Really, one thing the TIF shows is that there is increasing investment, economic investment in the area, and that's a positive thing. If you get into a situation where a TIF district is capturing all the dollars, whether it's all new dollars, whether they're actually incentivized by the TIF or not, that can be a tricky situation where you're losing dollars that would otherwise go into your tax base through the TIF. But the pure case, the pure argument or situation for the TIF is the TIF should be incentivizing dollars that would not be coming into the taxing jurisdiction, except for the improvements, the infrastructure improvements that go into. So I'll just leave this here as kind of existing data about what's going on with TIF capture within the jurisdiction. I can't really comment on, the policy decisions at this point, but it's just something we want to monitor as you continue to evaluate your tax rates. So the next chart is just showing revenues that are being generated in TIF areas, and you can see where those are being generated and how they're being generated. So what we do to go into property tax implications here is really synthesize that historical data, look at what's happening in the economy, what's happening in terms of new development, construction, and on a property class basis, forecast assessed value growth going forward. It's really important to know what the purpose of a forecast is, because a forecast or projection isn't valid for all purposes. It has a specific purpose, and this has a specific purpose of underlying your capital and debt service strategy. And so what we're trying to do here is project conservatively what a trend line, what a growth rate in your tax base looks like, and what you can rely on as you make debt service plans going into the future. We do intentionally project this conservatively. We don't want you to be in a situation where we project your tax base too high, you plan for more debt than you can actually take at a given rate, and you run into a situation that way. There's a lot more flexibility if we're conservative as we do this. If we get 2 or 3 years out and you have more tax-based growth than we projected, there's a lot of ways to manage that, and a lot of options, a lot more policy options than there are in the reverse. If we over-project your tax base, then you have to make decisions that way. So here's your baseline forecast that we're looking at. You've had about a 2.4% assessed value, annual assessed value growth between 2012 and 2020. You can see that's moderated by that stagnating assessed value change after the recession. And it's really starting to grow a lot faster. We're pegging this at an average rate at 3.5% going forward. That's a little bit more conservative than what you've had recently. One kind of curveball that's thrown in here is that you've got an 8.1% increase in your tax base for the May 2021 certified net assessed values, and that's the recently certified data. We've done some looking at the data that we can pull from that, and we're not confident enough that that is a repeatable number to actually build that into this projection going forward. One thing we saw there was about a 10% increase in across the board of residential assessed value on existing homes. So as Dr. McKibben said, there's growth in that market, there is a growth there. But sometimes what we see is, especially in assessments, because there's a lot of policy decisions at play, a lot of statistical processes at play in the county assessment's office. Sometimes we see not a lot of change in assessed value in a specific class, and then all of a sudden there's an adjustment that might really be 2 to 3 years of assessed value growth. And we just don't know enough about that 8.1% change to bake that into your tax-based forecast going into the future. But it's something we'll pay close attention to. But we do want to be careful we don't over-project here. So like I said, that 8.1% growth between pay 20 and pay 2021, there's about 10% increase across the board of residential, single-family residential. There's just over 200 new single-family homes coming online, so there is a lot of new construction that's occurring here. And there's also growth in the commercial and industrial sectors. So that's what we're using at this point for the projection. And as we look into translating this into dollars and cents on the revenue side, what we're doing here is we're comprising the budget scenario that you've been talking about, which is maintaining your overall tax rate at $1.10 going forward. The way this table is set up, this is truncated to 2025. We've got I've got some longer term charts just ahead of us. In your actual report, the projections go out to 2030. I just wanted to make it legible to fit on the slide here. The certified levy is the property tax dollars you're asking for. This is the numerator on the tax rate. Circuit breaker credit is dollars that are lost to you. saved by taxpayers, for taxpayers that are at the rate cap. And the net levy there is a certified levy less the circuit breaker credit. You can see for each of your major funds the projections we have going forward there. And notably, what we're doing is maintaining your overall, or showing your overall tax rate maintained at $1.10. And so what this does is, as you get more assessed value growth, you can support more, especially debt service capacity at a given tax rate. Your operations fund, that levy grows at a controlled rate that's established, a methodology is established by state statute. So there's not a lot of policy changes there. And so what you see there is that we're actually projecting your tax base to grow a little bit faster than the maximum allowable operations fund levy growth, which reduces that tax rate over time. Short term, something I think you've talked about is how the dollars change. This chart here is showing your total net property tax levy projection. See, there's an increase between 2020 and 2021 as you move back to that $1.10 tax rate. Because a lot of that change occurs in the debt service levy, you do have a reduction, one-year reduction here in your operations fund net levy, and that's because you're going to be absorbing more circuit breaker impact in that fund as you have a higher debt service levy. So managing that is something that Laura is aware of, and we've talked through those issues as well, but there may be some strategic decisions that are important there. So that really wraps up the information I have for today, but just want to recap that we are seeing strong investment into the region, so we're projecting sustained assessed value growth that should provide continued capacity for you to build out your capital plan and your debt service policies at that overall $1.10 tax rate. So I'm happy to take questions.
Jason, if you could go back a few slides just so we can correlate with what we just covered, more where it talks about where the circuit breaker and the levy is.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to bring the attention of the board to the 2021 column. When we talked about the demographic study and our increase in students, that's your education fund. And as Jason showed you, that very first box said state support. All state support money that you get goes into that education fund. And remember, I explained how we separated a portion of that fund out to be operations. Okay, so if you take a look at how much revenue, you remember that we're going to be asking for $9.5 million because that's how much you have been spending in general fund, right? And then you take a look at the operating net levy. So you should see about $9 million, $10 million. That gets you to the $19 million budget. So that's how your funds come in for the operations. So it's important that we do, maintain that $1.10 tax rate for several reasons, because we have to level off our impact of the circuit breaker. Otherwise, directly right there, that column right there, that number right there will be decreased. So, as your property values go up, your circuit breaker should go down. But remember, we don't host all the circuit breaker issues. You saw all of the tax units that were on the first slide that there in that map. So by maintaining that plan and staying within that range of $1.10, you'll be able to, you see the percentages staying near the 14-15% with a conservative increase of assessed value based on historical, having this little special situation. And remember, we talked about looking at TIFs differently now, right? So we're seeing that exact impact of what we're saying about what they use their money for. He said the bonds, they have to keep the infrastructure to a certain level. But with these two studies, we clearly see that different perspective has benefited our residents, which is a good thing, and our school, But again, we will monitor that situation because we can't get flip side when it's taking all of our funds, and that's a different type of discussion. However, if we maintain that $1.10 tax rate, and in order to do that, we're talking about different functionalities of different funds. Talk about education, operations, right? Now we're gonna talk about debt, and that debt allows you to borrow your funds to renovate, restore, redo your buildings. Because if you take a look at your property, levy and operations, I mean, $5 million is being obligated to circuit breaker, and generally that takes care of your capital project plans right there. That's why school districts have to go and get those funds, because that's the only way you can start doing these type of improvements to your building. There's just nothing there, and that's because of the legislative rule of that circuit breaker that has kind of forced us to do it. So when people say to the board, well, you're telling me you don't have no money, but yet you're building all this stuff. Well, right here is exactly why you have to. You know, your circuit breaker and your TIF districts have that impact on your operation, clearly. And so therefore, we don't have those resources in that area, and the only other resource is to do debt. So for our board members coming on, there is a difference in what is allowable in each and every fund. And we'll get into that more. I've, promised the superintendent board that we will talk about, I will talk about whenever I can correlate whatever we're talking about to what they're used to seeing. So it's key. The big number for me, and Jason and I talk a lot about circuit breaker, is that percentage right there. And that will probably change depending on, what other taxing entities do as well. But that's promising to me to maintain a near percentage rate. Some districts are losing upwards of 38% or more, and then you couple it, low property tax collection, and it's devastating to a school. So that's promising to me there to see that kind of level.
Okay, so I'm gonna put you on the spot. You did a conservative forecast of 3.5%. What would be your middle of the road or aggressive forecast? If I were to pin you down.
Yeah, I would not expect 8.1% to continue into the future. Kind of middle of the road, I would say 4.5 to 5.5 is what could be expected. Now, and that's more in the shorter term. We still don't know exactly what the COVID-related impacts will be, so it's possible that continued economic recession could affect that. One of the things that is out in the future is that at some point, you'll run out of space to develop new properties cheaply without a lot of investment in infrastructure, and that can slow your assessed value growth at some level out in the future. This projection doesn't get into that level of detail to like at the buying level to understand where those utility issues happen. And so that's why, over the next 8 to 10 years, 3.5% is probably a little bit conservative. But in the next 3 to 5 years, I would probably expect 4.5 to 5.
Any other questions, board? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Next, we have the consent agenda. Approval of the consent agenda. Board, may I have a motion, please?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Thank you, Dr. Clayton. May I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Any questions or comments on anything on the consent agenda? Okay. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. Next, we have gifts to buildings.
You can see there's a couple of donors choose and REMC, one from the Oaks Lodge for a total of $3,300.
$1,390.
Accept these gifts to building as submitted.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bellwalter. Any questions or comments on those? Okay. All those in favor of approving gifts to buildings, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, gifts to buildings are approved. Our first action item is the resolution of support for funding.
Thank you, Board. I'm very proud to present this to the Board. In 2020, Indiana schools faced an unprecedented challenge to maintain high quality and safe instruction due to COVID-19. It is anticipated that some method of virtual instruction may need to be maintained for the foreseeable future, and school corporations need to ensure their students are equipped with the best capacity for connectivity when distance learning is necessary. It is anticipated that teaching vacancies will also continue. Maintaining educational funding is critical. Members of the Greater Clark County School Board will commit to work alongside the Greater Clark County Education Association in urging the state legislature to provide education funding at the needed levels for the success of our schools, staff, and students. And we certainly, as a board and as a superintendent, want to stand in solidarity with our association in making sure that when the legislators start their legislative session here in January, that they understand, that our teachers, our schools are under a lot of stress right now, and they need to be funded appropriately. So I'd ask the board to approve this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Lofton. Board, may I have a motion, please?
Madam President, I move that we approve the resolution for support of education funding as a top priority for the legislature in 2021 as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Gilkey. Any questions or comments on this resolution?
I have one question.
Mr. Roberts?
Because I don't know, I've read a couple of things in our policies, and I guess I'm asking Ms. Geltmacher, this doesn't, I'm assuming you've looked at it already, this doesn't conflict with any restrictions against the school board being involved politically, does it?
No, this doesn't compel the board or the association to do anything. It doesn't support a political stance in either direction.
Okay.
This is just a resolution to work together to like ARC asked the legislature to provide funding. We're not taking a political stance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Any other questions or comments on this resolution? All those in favor of approving the resolution of support for funding, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The resolution is approved. Next, we have the elementary athletic handbook adjustment. Dr. Roach?
Good evening, Board. It's hard to believe we're almost into the second quarter and we're prepping for our third quarter. And as you know, it's been somewhat a roller coaster year. We've worked very hard to try to provide as many opportunities for our students in a safe environment as possible. So we have continued. Our athletic committee is recommending an amended athletic program. And we feel it's important to continue to keep our students active and involved. The modifications will include guidelines set forth by the athletic committee of each sport, and as we move through the year, different sports come into play. All activities and sports will be held in their respective buildings. Schools will not travel to other schools for competitions. Coaches will provide instructional coaching as well as meets and/or games for parents to attend. Parents will comply with social distance and mask recommendations, and schools and coaches will host athletics within the time frame designated of that season within the handbook. Final forms will continue so that the athletics information is available and to all coaches and schools, and that helps to provide attendance components and helps in our contact tracing efforts when we have to do so. The amendment is to ensure the safety of all athletes and allow that contact tracing to stay within the athletes building. Each sport, school, and coach will be supported by the committee. Should schools go to e-learning for an extended period of time, the sport that is affected will not be rescheduled. So, the plans and adjustments we have made for boys basketball, which will begin very soon in January. The focus will remain on the skill development of all athletes. 3rd through 5th graders may participate as indicated in the handbook. The season is scheduled to begin January 19th and will end February 9th. It is recommended that each school form teams for an intramural type of format and games. Groups may be divided to attend different days for smaller numbers of students each day to participate in practice. Each school may contact the athletic coordinator to schedule referees for 2 days of games. Schools will collect gate admission as outlined in the handbook to help pay for the referees, and each athlete must fill out final forms prior to participating. Games will be played with officials and will follow our GCCS special rules found in the athletic handbook. Based upon the nature of the activity, our wrestling program will not be held during the 2021 season.
Thank you, Mr. Hartledge. Board, may I have a motion, please?
Madam President, I move that we approve the elementary athletic handbook adjustment as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Buckwalter. And any questions or comments on these handbook adjustments? All right. All those in favor of approving the elementary athletic handbook adjustments, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Those handbook adjustments are approved. Next, we have the contract with, is it
Carolyn.
Carolyn Witten, okay.
Yes, Board. We are excited. We have once again received the Indiana Department of Education Early Literacy Intervention Grant. It was approved just a week or so ago and awarded to us in the amount of $29,131.38. This grant funding and plan provides for 4 days of on-site professional development for teachers and administrators. The training will provide learning opportunities responsive to district needs regarding organizing and managing the literacy block as it relates to guided reading. Training will include lesson demonstrations, instructional coaching, a train-the-trainer model, and facilitation of literacy-focused visionary planning, implementation, and reflection. The cost is $3,000 per day, which includes all travel expenses for a total expense of $12,000. It is currently scheduled for September 14th through the 17th of 2021. I also would like to report that this would be our 4th time that we work with Carolyn, and we believe that our partnership with her has really helped to maximize and grow the instructional practices of our teachers as we build our literacy framework across the district.
Thank you, Dr. Hartledge. Board, may I have a motion on this contract, please?
Move to approve the early literacy intervention grant with Carolyn Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Buckwalter. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Clayton. Any questions or comments on this item? Is this one of the many thousands of grants that you all?
Yes.
Y'all
I
are
mean,
amazing.
better because it becomes second nature.
Any questions or comments?
Yes,
Yes,
we are moving to accept the contract with Ms. Wood, right?
Yes, the contract with Carolyn Wynn.
Not the early learning literacy. We
No.
already done that.
No, that was part of that resolution of grants that we go for.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of approving the contract with Carolyn Gwynn, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And that contract is approved. Thank you. Next, we have the lease agreement between Greater Clark County Schools and CASI for Head Start services at Pleasant Ridge Elementary portable classrooms for 2020 through 2023.
Thank you, Madam President. In your board packets, I have attached the lease agreement between the Greater Clark County Schools and Community Action of Southern Indiana for Head Start services located at Pleasant Ridge Elementary. This is a 3-year agreement with 2 opportunities to renew 1 year each time. The agreement period is December 1st of 2020 through November 30th of 2023. They choose each opportunity to renew, the contract will be fulfilled for a 5-year agreement. They will pay $1,700 per month for 10 months and $500 per month for 2 months, totaling $18,000. We respectfully request the trustees to renew the Community Action of Southern Indiana Head Start lease agreement. And this has been reviewed by April Delmaker, our counsel. And I thank you for consideration. One side note, this group has paid on time, and we are renewing this time around. They've been good stewards of the rental for those 3 portables of that trust fund. So very appreciative of that.
Thank you. Board, may I have a motion, please?
Madam Chair, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Clayton.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the lease agreement between Greater Clark County Schools and Cassie for Head Start services at Pleasant Ridge Elementary for the portable classroom for 2020 to 2023.
Thank you, Dr. Clayton. May I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Gilkey. Any questions or comments about this lease agreement?
I have one question.
Mr. Hawkins?
Brought this up in the emails, and I think the consensus at the time was that it does cover, the lease payments cover our cost. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Any other questions or comments? All in favor of approving the lease agreement, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the lease agreement is approved. We have no public comments on non-agenda items, so we have board comments. Ms. Gilkey?
I would just like to wish everyone happy Thanksgiving, since we'll be meeting again before then. And just remind everybody, in light of everything that's going on in the world, we still have a lot to be grateful for. So I just wish everyone a season full of gratitude and safety.
Thank you, Ms. Gilkey. Ms. Perkins?
Yes,
Did, all right. Thank you, Ms. Perkins. Mr. Hawkins? Mr. Bellwether?
I neglected to say something during the personnel, but I just wanted to, for those of you who knew, a longtime classified staff, Joanne Perk, had passed away. And she was a good steward here in Greater Clark County Schools, and just prayers be with her family. I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Bellwether. Dr. Clayton?
Well, first, I'd like to congratulate and receive Mr. Furman, who will be replacing me next year. And ran a good race. And I was trying to figure out, what was so funny. Yesterday, my wife said, "Did you vote for him?" I said, "I almost did." We were planning some travel, and I was wondering how we were going to do it, so the community took care of that for me. But I think it's good to see that we have a young person coming on, and that will offer good ideas. We spoke for over half an hour, and I'm very impressed with him. And I think he'll make that. If I had a successor, it would be you. So you are my successor, and congratulations. I want to first, I'll be here at the next board meeting, but it's been a pleasure working with all of you. And it sort of made me feel kind of bad when people would call me up and feeling sorry. And I'm thinking, wow, even as a coach from GFA, y'all making me feel bad now. I'm feeling pretty good. But it's I say this, as an applicant for a teaching position in Greater Clark, to be employed, to become administrator, to retire and then come back and serve on the board, it's been a pleasure. As a man of God, I know that we have a season, and my season is over. But again, it's been a pleasure to work with all of you. And I
appreciate it.
It sounds like he's not gonna show up in December, doesn't it?
I'll be
Renee and I will find it.
Ms. Hutchinson? No, thank you. I would like to welcome Keith Freeman to the board and Kevin Paul. We have a little bit of a change when January starts, and I've known Keith for just a little while, met him probably a year or so ago, and I've known Mr. Paul for too long. Well, 7 days. We work there. Throw that in. And I know he has previous board experience in the city of J-Town and has had $5 go through our system. So, and Mr. Freeman has 2 children in our system right now as well. So, welcome him all.
I also want to congratulate both of you, Kevin and Keith, and welcome aboard. Thank you for coming tonight to listen to the presentation. It's very informative. Wanted to give the board a quick update on COVID. As you know, our schools reflect our communities, and cases are, definitely increasing, and we're just trying to make it through this week and next week. And then we're virtual learning after that. So we have in-person the rest of this week, in-person next week. But we do have some schools that we're looking very closely at, paying very close attention to, not so much because of positive cases, just quarantine. As you know, we shut down Jeffersonville High School for the rest of this week, and it very well end up being for next week too, just because of the quarantining issues and the staffing issues. We're monitoring a few other schools, like I said. Some numbers I want to give you. Currently, staff that are quarantined, there's 82 staff that are quarantined. That's our highest number, since we started July 29th. And that's not all because of cases that have occurred in the schools. It could be our staff being out doing somewhere else, getting quarantined because of a spouse or something like that. So it's not all reflective of us and what we're doing. Since the start of the year, July 29th, we've had 53 positive staff cases since July 29th, which, as a percentage, when you look at the percentage of that, that's not too bad when you consider we started July 29th. We've had 1,021 student quarantines since the start of the year. Once again, you look at that percentage, and it's not too bad from the number of days we've gone to school in person and started July 29th. And there's been 42 student positive cases since the start of the year. And once again, that doesn't mean they tested positive because they came to school. That could be a variety of factors, whether they, went to a Halloween party or went on fall break somewhere or whatever, but did want to share that information to you. And just let you know, like I said, we have in-person instruction the rest of this week and next week, and then we're virtual learning those 2 days before Thanksgiving, and also virtual learning that first week of December, and then our first semester is over, so we're going to try to make it through this week and next week, and get through this week, but also know that if we run into a situation in a school where there's a cluster of cases or we have staffing issues because too many are quarantined, we'll confer with the health department, and if we need to shut that school down and go to e-learning, we will. So, thank you.
On the cleaning, I know we're cleaning every day, and teachers are cleaning every day. But during our shutdown, we're doing any kind of special cleaning.
Some of the things that disinfection will continue to go on, but once we disinfect and we don't have the staff and the students there, we'll not disinfect daily until we get 3 or 4 days out before we're coming back after the break. But that's a time when we'll wax cafeteria floors, we'll take furniture out, we'll do some of the higher level shampooing of carpets and those types of things. So that would occur.
Each school does now have one of the electrostatic sprayers, so they could cover a school pretty quickly, in several classrooms. So anytime we have a positive case where somebody's been in a classroom, we can spray that pretty quickly.
I forgot one thing. I'd like to thank Chad for helping us with Franklin Square and the safety issues. If Chad can share what's coming up.
Yeah, so, Franklin Square, we all know where that's located, and that's been a concern on different levels. Working with the city of Jeffersonville to have that declared a school zone. If you're familiar with rumble strips, the thermoplastic rumble strips that kind of give you a warning of an approaching stoplight or something, they're getting ready to actually put thermoplastic rumble strips there on each direction on Court Avenue, and also a thermoplastic that'll say school zone. So you'd be very, very hard to miss that you've entered a school zone. And also we have now a four-way stop at Court and Mechanic, which is helping slow traffic down. Probably the biggest thing that we're going to continue to watch and work with the staff, and I've got a meeting with our SRO and the principal and a couple of others from the school, is just continually training and enforcing some of those parents who may not want to wait in the car rider line and circumvent that car rider line both in the morning and afternoon, and then want to park on Court, which is fine to park on Court if you're after hours, if you're dropping your student off and they're truly tardy, but not to circumvent that car rider line in its entirety. And what we're seeing occasionally is when that happens, they may want an attempt to cross the middle of the block. So just trying to be there, present, watching, and then we'll position staff members from the school to just friendly remind those parents if you need to go over the car rider line, or if you're truly tardy, park curbside and get them out safely and bring them into the school.
Thank you. Renee? Board, do we have a motion for adjournment?
Move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Thank you, Dr. Clayton. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned.